Hey friends, welcome back to the Bald Booktuber. My name is Scott. Today is January 7th. It's day 7 of 31 videos in 31 days. And I thought today we would look into some of my reading and channel stats from 2022 and a little bit into 2023 so far. For those that don't know, I'm a data analyst by trade. And I've been a baseball fan for most of my life, so I like numbers and metrics and so forth. I like digging into data. So I thought today I would throw some pie charts on the screen and annoy some of my coworkers. So that sounds like a fun thing to do. So the first thing we're going to look at here is just sort of an overview of my reading in the last year. I did read 93 books. That was an average rating of just over 4. My biggest months in terms of quantity of books read were April and September. My best months in terms of quality were July and November, because I don't really count last month. Last month the deck was stacked with only 3 of the 5 books that I read were rereads, and they're some of my favorite books ever with live ship traders, so that doesn't really count. Although I am happy that it was such a good month. But you can see I'm averaging about 8 books read per month, or at least I did last year, and about 3,700 pages or so per month, so a little bit over 100 pages read per day, which is a pretty good pace, I think. So that's just sort of an overview of books and pages read, obviously 93 books overall. And then what we'll take a look at is kind of how that 93 books breaks down. So in terms of genre, in terms of whether it's a read or a reread, etc., etc. So first and foremost, I guess here is by genre. You can see that fantasy and the various forms of fantasy that I read did make up the lion's share of my reading, which is not a surprise. I did break out Sun Eater as science fantasy, and I broke out Dark Tower as Western fantasy. Could have easily categorized them as science fiction and as whatever Dark Tower gets categorized as. I'm not really sure. But again, you could see that a lot of this is fantasy based, which again should be no surprise if you've watched my channel at all. One thing that I am particularly, I guess, proud of, or that I want to be continuing to do more of in 2023, is nonfiction, making up a decent chunk, that third biggest bucket in the grouping here. So I do love nonfiction. I just don't read it as much as probably I should or I have in the past. So I'd like to continue that trend of making that a decent sized chunk of my reading diet. Next up, we have the breakdown of reads versus rereads, and I talked about this a little bit in the postscript tag, but this was a reread heavy year. 2023 will be as well, with me continuing to reread Realm of the Elderlings. I'll be rereading A Song of Ice and Fire. I'll be rereading Red Rising. So I'm going to try and make it a point not to reread too many other things, if at all possible, because that's already going to be a sizable chunk. I love to reread. It is one of my favorite things to do. I have a famously awful memory, so anything I can do to refresh myself and get back into a world that I love with characters that I love is great. However, I am certainly not getting any younger, and the list of things that I want to read is not shrinking. So I do need to make it a point to limit how much I reread. But at least as far as last year, more than a quarter of the books that I read were rereads, which is an awful lot. And that included 6 Realm of the Elderlings books, Farseer and Live Ship Traders. That included 6, I think, of the Lost Fleet series by Jack Campbell, as well as miscellaneous other things. I reread 4 Sun Eater books. I reread 2 Five Warrior Angels books, etc., etc. So just a lot of rereading. So again, I'm going to try and limit that as we go forward to make sure that I am staying on task and getting new books read. All right, this chart breaks down how I read, and you can see about half of what I read was immersive. Another almost half was audio only, with a few books in there that were Kindle only. Excuse me. And for the ones that are Kindle only, what that tells us is either A, the audiobook had not been produced yet, which was the case with Ashes of Man and with The Lonesome Crown. And I don't remember what the third one was. But yeah, either the audiobook hadn't been produced yet or it won't be produced, because if there's an option to include audio, I always do it. I just really love audio. I've always been an auditory learner, so that's just my preferred method. And obviously, again, if you've watched the channel at all, you know that audio narration is something I talk about ad nauseum, so should not be a surprise. If you're unfamiliar with the term of immersive reading, that simply means reading while listening at the same time. So there are native immersive reading features built into the Kindle app on iPhone and built into Kindle Fires that that help with the process. So if you own both the Kindle and the audio version, it will kind of track through and turn the pages and stuff for you. Or it could be a manual process like I just did with Shadow of the Torturer, where I have the physical copy and I'm reading through that while I'm listening to the audio. So either counts. But again, that's just my preferred way. I like to follow through while it's being read to me. All right. These last 2 days, I put out videos of fantasy series and fantasy standalones that I either will be reading imminently or at the least are on the radar to read, I hope soon. So what this graph does is shows the breakdown of reads that are part of a series versus reads that are standalone in nature. And you can see this is very, very skewed towards series. And that's just, again, part of that is because I love to read fantasy, and fantasy typically is in series form. And part of it is just I love to read series. I love ongoing book series where characters grow over time and you get to know them, and you know, they have arcs and all this kind of fun stuff. But 77% is pretty hefty, especially when you consider like the nonfiction that I read; those are all standalones and this kind of stuff. So probably will look to balance this ratio out a tiny bit, but I think it will always skew heavily towards series just because that's the type of reader that I am. All right, this next chart here is going to be the authors that I read the most. Stephen King coming in the pole position here, and that's not too surprising when we talk about how I read through the entirety of The Dark Tower. That's 8 books. When considering Wind Through the Keyhole, I read Carrie and Salem's Lot both for the first time. I read The Shining for the first time. I read Fairy Tale on release date, and there must be one other one that I'm forgetting. I don't remember right off the top of my head, and I'm not going to go look, but I must have read one other Stephen King during the course of the year. But a lot of King, and most of it very good. Oh, Firestarter was the other one, sorry. Yeah, I read Firestarter this year as well in preparation for that awful movie. Yeah, most of it was quite good. I didn't particularly love Song of Susanna, but I still gave that like 3 Stanley nods. I really didn't enjoy Wind Through the Keyhole at all. Gave that 2. It's really rare for me to rate a book 1. I did have a 1 Stanley nod read this year. It was a nonfiction book called Hype, but otherwise, usually it's 2 or above for me. I've been told I'm pretty lenient on my rating system, but that's fine. Jack Campbell was the next biggest at 10 books, which I'm surprised I did that many this year. He has the Lost Fleet series, and then I can't remember what the follow-up sequel series is called. Lost Fleet something. It's a direct sequel series. And I read 10 of those this year, all audio only. I really like that narrator, Christian something. Starts with an R. I don't remember off the top of my head. My memory is not great this morning or ever, so that is what it is. But I really like these. They're quick and easy. Just super straightforward space opera. You've got first contact situations. You've got different alien species that are friend and foe. Military sci-fi. They're fun. It's a fun little series, and he is a retired Navy. I don't know if he was an admiral or he was in the Navy. I'm not sure what rank he had, but when he retired, he got into reading science fiction and fantasy. So seems like a pretty all right guy, and I have read a lot of his books now. In the next position, we have Christopher Rocchio again. I am counting it as 7 because I both read and reread Kingdoms of Death this year, so that's 2 plus the other 4 that I read or reread this year. And then I read Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 2. So those are the 7. Obviously, I can't stop gushing about the guy or about his series. It's a really high rating. That's the breaks. Next up is Queen Robin Hobb, and that's Farseer and Live Ship Traders. Not obviously a perfect score because I rated both Assassin's Apprentice and Assassin's Quest a 4 upon reread, but everything else was a 5. I did those 2 series and the novella The Willful Princess and The Piebald Prince, which was in my top 10 this year. Robert McCammon came in next with 6 Matthew Corbett novels of varying quality, but overall very, very good. I've rated everything so far either 5 or 4 Stanley Notes. And then, of course, my first year reading him, Frederick Bachman. I read 5 Bachman books, starting with A Man Called Uva, which was one of my books of the year. I read Anxious People, which I really, really loved, but somehow was my least favorite among the 5. And then the Beartown trilogy, which I thought was perfect. So, and that also, those were some of my books of the year. So I will be reading more Bachman. I hope he will continue to write because I am going to ultimately read everything that guy writes. So those are the authors that I read the most from this year. Obviously, I read more than just books from these people, but I thought it would highlight the authors that I read the most. And then finally, I thought we'd look at kind of channel growth and health here. So in the chart, I have a line for kind of pre-channel because I did make videos here and there before this was a real channel, so there were some subscribers in part of that, and there were some views. Obviously nothing material or nothing that mattered, but I rolled the channel out about a year ago, last week I guess, mid-January of 2022. So I have this broken down by quarter, starting in Q1. You can see that views are relatively consistent over the course of the 4 quarters. Subscriber count is relatively steady, as well as watch hours. What's interesting, or at least interesting to me, is that by doing this 1 video a day, I'm on track to have kind of January blow out anything that I've done in any individual quarter in terms of both views and watch hours. So I really appreciate everybody's support, those that have watched the videos, those that have commented, liked, etc., shared the videos. That's super helpful. In terms of subscriber count, it doesn't appear to have made too much, if any, of a difference. So subscriber count is not growing despite doing this, which is fine, as long as the people that are here are enjoying the content. That's what really matters to me. I do have kind of an internal goal to hit 1,000 this year, but if I don't, that's perfectly fine. As of today, I'm at 660 subscribers, so I'd like to say, if I look at this again in December, that I'll be over 1,000, but if I'm not, again, no big deal. That's sort of the health of the channel. Again, I owe it to all of you who are watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing when you do. I appreciate all of the support. I think we'll end it right there. I hope everyone is having a wonderful year so far. And as always, publication order always, my friends.